We just finished building this guy with magnets. So now it's time to give it some paint. As per usual, we're going to make it quick, we're going to make it easy, and most importantly, we're going to make it nice. Okay, no, I won't do that again. Let's take a look. Here is the primed Sentinel. It's the armored version. You know, for a split second there, I thought, I wonder if I could magnetize this vehicle so you can have the Scout or the armored version. And I quickly, after reading the instruction manuals, I was like, no thanks. That's not a good idea. So I have it in a couple of different pieces because it's going to be all kinds of interference with painting. And so I've got the head unit, I've got the leg unit, and I've got the exhaust unit, and I've got a bunch of the weapons here somewhere. And so I'm going to do kind of what I've been doing in the past, where I just focus. It's mostly brown, but I do a couple of the armored panels are the bone yellow. So it's going to be looking a little interesting. This one is going to be mostly brown. So I'm going to start laying down my base glaze and see what it looks like. And by the way, I don't know if you can tell, I tried my hand at some texturing again. I just couldn't leave well enough alone. And so I think it looks okay, but I'll have to see when it's all said and done if it made any difference whatsoever. So far, it hasn't. A final note that I thought I should mention as I kind of lay down this primer, or this base coat, is I went with an unusual primer in that I used a primer with a satin finish. If you've seen my videos, my sort of recent, past couple of weeks, where I tested a bunch of different primers, you saw that I used, one of them was a satin finish primer, and I really didn't like it. And I've used it for this model because I want to try and I want to see what this would look like. So I'm hoping that it'll have the same properties with this model that it had on the Troopers, in that the highlights on the brown, the dark brown, they're really pronounced. I think that's going to look pretty interesting here. So I'm using a quality of that primer that I didn't like to get an effect that I think I might enjoy. So let's see how this experiment works out. So this took me longer than I expected. I think it was just all the drying times and stuff like that. I have a hair dryer to help me dry these things, but I don't know why. I really don't like using it. I think it blows everything all over my surface. I don't know. I have it. I should use it more, but I just don't. So there's a lot of drying time kind of in between. And also, I ended up having to strip this. I had one color thing going and I didn't like it, and so this is what I ended up with for the head, and it's paired up with the legs that kind of look like this. While I was at it, I did the weapons and I started putting in just a little bit of the detail base coat. I wouldn't normally put this in there, but I had a lot of downtime as things were drying, and so I am ready now to start doing the wash layer, and I'm going to start with this bone white or skeleton bone color first, and I've mixed up a little wash. So I started with this flesh wash, which seems like a weird choice, right? Because this usually goes on faces or exposed bits of human skin. I like it because it's a really good wash for this. It's kind of like flesh, it's kind of like soft tone, kind of like this guy, but it's got a little bit of red and it's a little darker. The step up from that would be strong tone, and this is a little too dark, it's a little too black. So I've been using flesh wash for this to wash over this color, and I like the results, but I did want to make sure it isn't very dark, and so I've mixed up my flesh wash with a couple of drops of water to dilute it and a couple of drops of this quick shade mixing medium to make sure that it still flows the way it's supposed to. And I'm going to try to be a little more conscientious than I normally am as I apply this. And just looking at it, it looks a little more red than brown than I remember. It's a little strange, but I'm going to go with it. It's going to look a little different, but I think that's okay. The important thing is I don't want to make it streaky the way that I have had models look in the past. So that's another one of the reasons that I thinned it out a bit. I wanted to streak less and just kind of collect in certain areas. I don't know for a fact that it's going to work. I suspect it's going to work. Let's see what results I get from this little experiment. Alright, so this is coming along. I've done the washing on the secondary color, which is this bone white you see here. Looks pretty decent, but I do have a confession to make. This is not the color I told you about. Remember how I had mixed that wash with, it was a flesh wash? I added on here. It was too red. I didn't like it. I thought I had been using it before. I guess I was using it for something else. I don't know. I went back and remixed it with just soft tone. I watered it down or thinned it out as before, and I got this very pleasant light brown. So that's what I'm going to go with. I've got it in all the major components right there. I took some special care not to be too heavy-handed with it and kind of mopping it up whenever it would accumulate. I didn't do a perfect job, but it's got a nice variability. I need to go back and do the underside of this. It's a slightly different shade. I think you know, as I'm working with these, I have to worry about where I'm going to hold them and how they're going to dry. So I didn't pay as much attention to this part. So that's something for you to consider. So I'm going to do that, but I also want to start on the dark wash for this dark brown. And so I'm using a combination of dark tone, watered it down a bit, and I added some of the quick shade medium. And so now I'm going to go over this with the dark wash. The idea is that I want to darken up the recesses a bit without having too much of an impact on the color, on the brown. And it's going to have some, and that's fine. I just want to control it a bit. I don't want it to be too much. So, being pretty generous with it, because it will dry up and it'll be very, very subtle for the most part. Now, I will say this model is a little harder to paint than I'm used to. But what I mean by that is the actual handling of it while I'm painting. It's kind of a beefy model, but it isn't, maybe spindly is the right term. It's hard to get a hold of the model and hold it in place and then letting it dry. I don't know, it just seems like a lot more work than I'm used to, you know, with tanks and whatever and troops. It's not a horrible thing. It's just different. You're going to have to approach this model a little differently. Live and learn, you know. Well, here's what she looks like so far. This is our Armored Sentinel. It is... it's got the base and it's got the wash on all the appropriate pieces. And I went ahead and started kind of working on some of these weapons, and so you'll see like they have the power leads. I went with this interesting orange color because I wanted to do something a little different. I think it was dry rust. This guy right there. And then once it dried up, I washed it with some red tone right there. And it gives it a really nice orangey red color that I don't think I have anywhere else. I initially started it off with these flame tanks. This is the accessory pack for the heavy flamer, and I really like the color, and I thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool if the power leads kind of had that color? And so a lot of these accessories and weapons will have, if they kind of have like a bundle of wires, that's the paint scheme I went with. For the other more solid, like the big chunky wire, I went with my usual green, which is the same green here, and it's supposed to look a little different because I washed it with some blue. I don't know that it has the effect that I was looking for exactly, but you know, it's a little different. So this is technically a detail, but it was also kind of a base and wash, so I threw it on there. So I've paused here because technically this is tabletop ready. You could field it. Well, you know, assuming you have a base, and I do. I made the base kind of as I was letting the model dry. This is what I ended up with. I still need to do the grass tufts. You'll notice that I have some interesting terrain here. I've got these air-dried clay kind of concrete pads. I threw on some vehicle bits. This is from a Dreadnought. These are some bits that I had. Here's the smoke launcher from the Dreadnought. The idea is it's a kind of the partial ruins of a Dreadnought that's seen better days. And I went with a kind of a generic color, kind of hoping he'd look, it was kind of chaosy. I might still go over it with some gold trim or some bronze trim to kind of enhance the idea that it's a chaos Dreadnought as opposed to one of the Imperium's finest. So that's something I still need to kind of address. So technically speaking, if I mounted this Sentinel onto the base, we have a tabletop ready model. But I haven't done any detailing. And while you could just field it, like, see, look at this weapon, right? You can field it this way and it's perfectly fine. It isn't the best it could be. Like, there's plenty of stuff we could still do to this. And I think, well, so far in this channel, I haven't done like the bare minimum. I've done something kind of in between the bare minimum and let's try hard. So somewhere in between. I've got the bare minimum now, and so I want to enhance what I've got, right, to make it better than what you're likely to encounter out in the tabletop. So, in terms of details, there's really a couple of things. So one of the things I want to do is I want to add some of the metallics. So, like, a lot of these weapons could benefit from some metallics, and so I want to do that. There's also, I want to try my hand at dry brushing some of that dark brown back to kind of bring back the original brown color. I don't know how well it's going to work, but I think it's worth the effort. And I might do some dry brushing on this armor, this kind of the skeleton bone armor, just to kind of enhance those highlights a bit. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with dry brushing, but I picked up a Games Workshop dry brush. It's a brush specifically designed, I guess, for dry brushing. So I've got a couple, and so I'm hoping to use them to good effect. So here's some of the other ones that I got. They're just various sizes, and so I'm hoping that this is going to help me do a better job with dry brushing than I have been able to do thus far. I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm, hope springs eternal. So I will start with, let's start with the metal bits, because that I'm more confident than anything else. I also happen to have the metal color I want to use right on my wet palette, so Let's start there. So it's a pretty bright silver. It's brighter than I usually use, but it seems to work well on these Astra Militarum troops, especially since I always go back and add some dark wash over them anyway to bring down the shine. So there's plenty of weapons, and I want to make sure to enhance each and every one of them with just a little bit of metal. At least. Some will, of course, have more metal than others. Would you just look at this pretty girl? Oh man. Finished detailing her. Glued everything that needed to be glued, and gave it a nice light coat of matte varnish, and she's all done. I did a few details that I normally wouldn't have bothered with because I really enjoyed working on this project. And so most of the details that I'm talking about are on the weapons. And so if you look at the plasma cannon, yeah, I did the blue thing like I normally do, but the conduits is this little gap right there that it looks like maybe it could be transparent, and so I made it blue like the plasma glow. I highlighted the dials so you can kind of see the needles on there. This thing, well, I tried something. It didn't work out quite like I wanted. You'll see the little windows on the in the armored cockpit kind of thing, and so I wanted to give them kind of a red glow to kind of simulate what it would look like if it was dark inside, but they used kind of a dim red lighting inside. So I didn't want to make it bright red because it's not emissive, but it is kind of a dull glow. My spirit was in the right place. My execution needed some work, but the idea is there, and I think I'll get better as I do more of these. So up here, up top, you'll notice I went with this kind of green. This normally wouldn't have been green. I just wanted a splash of color on there. I guess I could have gone with this dark brown up there, but there was already too much, I thought, too much of that dark brown. And so rather than just keeping it all green, I added some black detailing. There's a lot of spot lamps on this vehicle. I'm not exactly sure that's what those are, but I went ahead and said, yeah, they're spot lamps. There's a headlamp there. There's another spot lamp over there. I made sure the little smoke launchers on the chin were visible. And I even made sure on the exhaust here that all the little dots were filled in. Normally I would just give it a dark wash, and you know, they're not, the dark wash when it dries up, it's much lighter than you think. And so I went back in with actual black paint, dipped it in. These look like little heat sinks with little radiator fins. I made sure that those were silvered up a bit. All the wires, I made sure that they were painted. I went all out. I went in and did as many of these details as I could. I just thought this model was so interesting, and I like the way it looks. Yeah, yes, it totally reminds me of the AT-ST Walker from Star Wars fame. And so I wanted to even give it as dynamic a pose as I could. So it's only glued on one leg. And so this leg is kind of flying over these dreadnought pieces. I think it looks pretty decent. I've even tilted the cockpit a bit so that's kind of looking to its right, and the headlamp stuff at the top is also facing that right way, like it's spotted a target. I'm really happy with how this turned out. Now, I'm even pretty happy with the base. It's not it's not perfect, but this is probably my best basing work so far. I'm just really happy with my performance on here, and I'm, usually at this stage of the video, I'm like, oh, well, I could have done better here, I could have done better there, and yes, I could have done better. There's plenty of places where I could have done better, but I am happy, for a change, with the results of this model, and I think it's going to be a nice complement to my small but growing army. I am really proud of my magnetizing work, and all the detailing that went into all the weapons and the weapon accessories. This little chin-mounted chain sword, I love it to pieces. There's just a lot to like about this model, and I'm really happy with it. I took a lot of the lessons that I've been telling myself I need to learn, and so you'll notice that there's a lot less of the gloopiness of the wash. I made sure that if it was pooled, I dried it up a bit so that it dried consistently. The legs were kind of a pain to paint and assemble, but I like the effect that the glazing gave it. So there's basically a lot of highlights on here. Here's the thing I didn't do that I was kind of thinking I was going to, but I didn't end up doing it. I didn't go back with that dark brown and just do some other highlighting. I thought about it, but honestly, I was afraid that I would mess it up. I was satisfied with the way it looked, at that level, at that stage. And I thought, well, if I go in there and start messing with the paint job, it could end up worse than it is. And so that's something I need to work on. It's that fear of messing up adequate work. And that keeps me from maybe pursuing better than adequate work. I'm confident I am not the only person who has that issue, but I have that issue. And so it's something I need to work on, and someday I'll be better at that. Today was not that day. There it is with the multi-laser. And the flamer, which I'll probably never use, but it looks really cool, I think. Which way does this go? I'm never quite sure. Let's see, it's that. I like that little splash of color that those fuel canisters give the model. And I don't know if you can tell, but I even made sure all the little buttons were painted in. Those are little details that I normally would omit. But yeah, I was happy with this guy. I love that you can add or remove the missile. And yeah, I'm a happy camper. I am a happy camper. Even that thing looks pretty decent. So anyway, I just want to thank you guys for watching. If you made it to the end of this video, I appreciate it. If you enjoyed this content, consider giving this a like or even a subscribe. I'm up to 100 subscribers somehow. I am at a loss. I am ecstatic. So apparently some of you enjoy this content. I'll keep making it as long as you keep watching it. I hope this helped you a little bit. I hope you learned a little bit about how to make one of these look really good without spending a ton of time painting it. Have a wonderful afternoon, and as always, be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.